I'm Hannah Williams.
And I'm James Daniels.
And you're listening to the 2 Cents Podcast, but this time...
it's a live recording.
So we are filming live, so the cameras are rolling, our mic is capturing. We are live from the Capital One Cafe in Washington, D.C. in Georgetown, and we have a really exciting episode planned for you all today, talking about navigating our finances in relationships and also friendships. Relationships is more than just your partner, your husband, your wife. It can be the loved ones that you have that are part of your story too. So we're going to talk about things that can come up that might be tricky situations, how to navigate them, and our best advice for that too. But first, we do have a word from our sponsor, Capital One Cafe. So today we're sipping on the Daybreaker Coffee Blend, which is a Verve Roastery exclusive.
Yeah, it has notes of golden apple, toasted marshmallow, and dark chocolate. Daybreaker is for everyone. It's approachable, classic, and delicious. Stop in the Capital One Cafe to try a signature drink or pick up whole beans and instant packets for at-home brewing today.
And if you want to try any of the handcrafted beverages at the Capital One Cafes, we always have a free coffee link available. If you're listening on the pod, available at the link in the description below. And if you're here today with us, it's available at the link in our bio. So anytime you want to try Capital One Cafe handcrafted beverage, it's on us. So we have an icebreaker that we're going to go through with you all today to warm up the conversation about navigating our money and our relationships. So is splitting the bill lazy or equal? We want to hear your 2 cents as well, but we're going to debate a little bit about what that means.
Yeah, so first, could you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by that?
Right. So what we mean by that is splitting the bill 50-50 doesn't always make that equitable or fair, because we all have our own relationships with money, our own situations with money. Maybe you're going out to have dinner with a friend and they choose to go to a more expensive spot when you would rather go somewhere more laid back, like fast food. Maybe you have a partner who makes more than you and you don't want to split 50-50 rent because it wouldn't be equitable in that situation versus the amount of buying power that each person has with their budget. So it's not always equitable to go 50-50, even though you think it could be the right thing.
Yeah, so I think that it's situation dependent. You know, with a roommate, if you're going in 50-50 on rent, that's kind of understandable. But if you're also living with a roommate who only makes minimum wage and you make roughly, $100,000, then I don't think that it's necessarily equitable for you to tell them that they need to go half on rent, So I think that it's all situation dependent. Sometimes it may be more understandable for smaller things like Wi-Fi, maybe a quick bite to eat. But then for bigger things or bigger purchases, if it's outside of their budget, then maybe you should consider going in a little bit more, or even making the decision not to have that.
Right. There's always a way that you could meet in the middle. So we want to hear your 2 cents. We've got a microphone that's going to go around and capture your response. If you don't want to be on camera, let us know now. But should people contribute based on what they can afford, or should it always be an even percentage? And what is the different case scenario that would make that a different response for you?
So I would say it depends on your situation. In my own relationship, right? I'm married to a dentist, but when I met him, I was a grad student, a poor, ramen noodle eating grad student, right? So we had a very open and honest conversation because I couldn't do the same things. I couldn't eat at the same places. I could barely afford my rent. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, definitely. How did y'all meet in the middle now? Are you making more? Are you guys more even?
I'm making more.
Love it.
Thanks to
more than
you
a
all.
dentist.
Yeah.
You're doing pretty good. What do you do?
Not more than a dentist, but
Okay.
we're on equal footing. So I'm in technical recruit
Nice.
cleared engineers. And so now it's more kind of 50-50.
I love that. Great. Thanks for sharing your 2 cents.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
and that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else want to share a certain, yeah?
Definitely a share of depending on like where you at in terms of standing. For example, I work in tech. My girlfriend, she's in future fiance as well. She works in private client. Thank you. But she works in private client insurance, and I make more than her. And we're also long distance, so it's pretty much like two different lives. So what we do is we try to put everything on the credit card. I also, by making her an authorized user, I can help her build her credit because my credit is better than her. No disrespect. But at the same time, I understand that because when we start to live together, a lot of our expenses are going to be consolidated. We're not going to pay two different rents. We don't have to pay two different car insurances, things like that. And so I just try to make a benefit of, like, for example, if she spends $1,000, I only ask her maybe to give me 600, maybe 700, because it doesn't make any sense for her to give me the entire $1,000 when she's using my credit card to help gain credit card points and things like that. So it really just depends on where we're at. So, but when we do move together and things like that, and hopefully she can stay with her position because it's nationwide, it still will probably be in the same scenario. But at the same time, I think my position and where my career is, I'll probably always be making more than her. So I'm never going to ask her for like completely 50-50 and things like that. Just because if I'm making more than you, especially a large sum, it makes no sense to do that. So
Yeah, agreed.
Definitely. One of the questions that we had saved for the future, but I think it would be a good time to bring it up now, is I thought this was really interesting and I'd love to hear your 2 cents. Do you think that splitting the bill makes dating less romantic? Does it take away a little bit of the appeal, of being treated and whatever being a gentleman means to people? What are your 2 cents? I'd love to hear if it matters to you for the bill to be covered, at least on the first date, from a female's perspective, or yeah.
Hi, yeah, I would say that I definitely think it matters from a female's perspective because courting is like something that you look forward to when you're going out and you're dating. And I think there's also like a satisfaction that maybe the men in the room can kind of like speak to, but like you're treating somebody and you're taking care of them, even though you're not, committed to them. It's just like the opportunity itself is exciting. So I feel like you kind of want to be on, like, as a woman, you want to be on the end that's like receiving. And as a man, you want to be able to kind of demonstrate that you're able to give. So I feel like it's just like the fun of it and you want to be able to engage in it. So I think that it's like kind of cool to be part of that process on both sides.
Definitely.
Yeah, what are your thoughts?
I agree. I think that's a little bit traditional of me, but untraditional of me as well, because I normally would say, let's go 50-50. I want to be responsible for my own half. I don't really like people covering for me, but I would on the first date if the guy was like, okay, we're
Me?
going 50-50, right? It would have to be you. I would definitely think, is he serious about me or are we just friends? Which is interesting. Does that mean, if somebody pulled that out, like, let's go 50-50, would that change your perception of how the entire date went? I think it would change mine.
Now, with that opinion of that, would that change if you're the one that offers to pay 50-50 on the first date?
What do you think?
So to me, paying, I guess, covering the whole bill on the first date, I kind of have that same appeal of, the traditional sense. It's kind of just to show, hey, I can provide if need be. But if you did just happen to offer, then I don't know. It's kind of this part of me that goes, well, I have to allow her to be an independent person. So, like, yes, we can go 50-50. I wouldn't prefer it. But, like, yeah, we can do 50-50 if that's what you wanted.
Mm-hmm. Would it be like a slight? Like, do you think it would be a hurt to
that
the
Baltimore
ego?
term?
Yeah, right. Would it hurt your ego?
No. I mean, I'm a pretty secure person, so I don't think that it'll necessarily hurt. But it'll definitely make me second guess where we go the next time because I'm like, oh, well, if you can afford this, then let's see if we can go to a more expensive place and I'll cover that one.
We did an episode that came out today on financial red flags. And I would say if you asked for either or, if you asked to go 50-50 and the response was negative, or they just didn't want to go 50-50, that would be a red flag as well. That reaction to it you would want something that's more easygoing and like,
Exactly.
oh, okay, like let's navigate it versus like, no, I'm paying. Like that would be kind of weird.
Yeah, definitely. Controlling almost.
Controlling, exactly. It would be a red flag that they could be potentially controlling down the road.
All right. And with that, we'll move to the next topic.
And with that, we're rolling on. So our main topic is how much should you know about your partner or living situation, your roommate? How much should you know about their finances? And I think this is really important when it comes to if you are sharing living space or a specific life milestone. So a roommate or a partner is definitely what comes to mind here. I think we should talk a little bit about our situation with how long it took for us to learn about how much we made. And then we'll answer a little bit of the questions.
Yeah. So if you and I could start off with
Yeah.
that. So I think that we started talking about money pretty early on because we were looking to move in with one another.
We met in December of 2017.
Since that's such a big milestone, moving into together, you're kind of consolidating finances. We started talking about money immediately.
Mm-hmm.
I was just getting out of the military. You were
senior in college.
Yeah, graduating college soon. So we both understood that we didn't have a lot of money to spend.
It was easy not to talk about money because we
Right.
didn't have any.
Right. But then we did run into the issue where with our first apartment, I actually got denied for it because of my credit.
Yep.
Yeah. So then we kind of were forced to be put into this position where we have to have this discussion so that we can continue to move forward with these milestones that we were, trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think this is such a good learning lesson for anyone listening, that it's important to have these conversations ahead of time, because what happened with us was we had never talked about our financial situation. I'd never asked you, do you have any debt? What's your credit score? Like, how much do you make?
And to be honest, if you would have asked, I would have been like, yeah, I don't know.
I don't know, right? And you didn't, because it was a real surprise when we applied for our first apartment and it came back that you were denied because you had multiple collections. Multiple collections that you didn't know about. So we were both shocked.
Yeah, caught both of us off guard. But with that, we buckled down and we were like, let's figure this out together. And I think that that's what actually helped get me past those, collections and delinquencies, was because I had someone else that I can also count on to help me figure these things out. A young person right out of the military, you don't really understand anything about life. Everything was just taken care of for you. Now you're being put into the real world. You have to find a regular job. You have to get back used to, or you have to get used to living amongst regular people and stuff like that. So it was a lot to take in, knowing that I had this big thing looming over my head. But then being able to rely on you as a outlet to help out with that helped out a lot.
Yeah, but I also didn't know anything. I was a young college student, senior year, and I don't know about anybody in this room, but I didn't get a personal finance, adulting 101 course in high school or college. So I didn't learn anything about credit scores when I was in college. And luckily enough, I just had a special interest in figuring it out. And we had to go to all 3 credit agencies. We kept really detailed catalogs of everything. We had to pay a couple lawyers a couple $1,000s to negotiate and get the collections off of your credit. And we actually built your credit back up from low 400s or high 400s to 800 now.
Yeah, now I'm at 800.
Right. So it's possible. What this story tells me is, if I had just saw you as a red flag, like he never told me about this, like his financial history makes him a bad person, if I had seen it that way, we wouldn't be where we are today.
Oh, definitely not. But then that also posed the question, at what point in time should you, as a couple, or even as roommates or as people living together, at what point in time should you discuss one another's credit score, even if you should do that, like that's the biggest thing. I think for us, being able to discuss that early on helped make this progress that we're at now.
And it wasn't by choice, it was by force.
Yeah, by force.
But it worked out for us. So that was about 7 months into our relationship.
Yeah.
But I think it's all about whether or not you're serious. Does it matter, to share this information, and for what reason? For us, we were moving in together and both our names were going to be on this apartment. So we both had to pass the application and the test, and it mattered, that we both knew that going forward.
Yeah.
But it also brings up another question. Should couples know each other's salaries, and at what point do you have those conversations? So I'm curious. We told you how we found out, how soon we found out. Anyone here in a relationship willing to share when they had this conversation with their partners and for what reason? Yeah, we got a question over here.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's really being open and honest and transparent.
Transparent to our name.
Yeah, I would think that sharing your salary is a little less open than sharing credit score. Kind of like two different tiers.
Yeah.
Especially if you make a lot of money, like you have no problem sharing. So I think if you make a lot of money, you're like, oh, hey, I make this much. So yeah, no, it's not a problem at all. I think that probably could be, if you're serious, maybe like a month or two, into the relationship, you share how much you make.
That feels fast to me, a month.
I mean, why not?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah,
what is the risk, right? I mean, as long as they don't know your other personal information.
Right, and then
like username and password.
At what point do you share the other things like the credit score? I mean, that's just, I had another question, but it can go a little deeper as far as like from sharing the information about your finances and credit score and whatnot. Like, is that something that you were both raised in, like either not sharing or the opposite where you're sharing? Because personally, I got into a relationship where my partner was just open and honest. But my family had never really shared that. So I was like, you're doing what? And then it became like okay to share and talk about that in further relationships. But that definitely, it depends on the couple, I guess. But also if you could like speak about that, how did you come to think that, oh, I shouldn't share it or I should?
I grew up pretty transparent. Funny enough, like when we get comments on social media on our videos, what do you do? How much do you make? We get a lot of people from overseas, like Europe, and they're like, you should try asking this, and you're in like Paris and no one's going to answer. But my experience is completely different. Like my family's Belgian, so we're European. So we must be the odd ones out. But we talked about everything, like politics, religion. Nothing was off the table at dinner. Like it's just part of my culture from over there. So Paris is different, but in my culture, it's been very transparent. And I think that really helped me, see situations like this as a learning experience, and that what is the reason why you have all these problems. And if we don't want to be too crazy about the details because it was from an ex-wife, we are on really good terms with now.
Good terms now.
So we want to be careful not to rock the boat and not be on good terms. But there was a reason why. And so it really came down to me doing investigation and just asking questions and being open to it. And I think that's just how I've always been raised.
The way that I was raised, it definitely didn't match up. My family was always pretty secretive when it came to money, never really knew how much anybody made, especially growing up. And then we were pretty tight with money as well. So that's kind of where that came from. But I think just my experience in the military, because pay is so transparent in the military, so we all discuss it. We all talk about pay raises and pay bumps and how much you're getting for this or losing for that. So that kind of just helped reinforce this mindset that talking about your pay isn't a bad thing. Which, differed from what I was raised from. So when we got into our relationship and, we began having discussions about moving in, to me, it only made sense to talk about money at that point, because I was like, we're getting ready to share something big. And for the most part, we're either going to be splitting rent or one of us has to cover it. So we should probably know how much we have coming in at that point.
And basically moving forward from there, after we had that conversation, things started just going way faster. But I think it's because we opened the door to the conversation, and it just went forward from there. You started looking at new jobs. So we were living together, and I was very involved in, your interview process and helping you prep. So I was involved in figuring out, how much should you be asking for? Like, how much are you going to make? Because you would tell me, you'd be like, I got the job. How much are you making? This much. Yeah, let's go party. So it's open. It's easy to have that conversation, I think, when you just have an open mind about it.
Yeah, and I think it was also because we were trying to figure out budget as well. I mean, we were scraping by, you doing your waitress gig, and I was doing windows, doors, and roofs, door to door. So terrible job. Don't do it.
But you learned a lot, and our house is falling apart now. So he knows a lot of random knowledge that's helped us out a lot.
Yeah, it did help out. But we were trying to figure out budget, with those salaries. So that's kind of what forced us to be like, all right, well, let's talk about these things. I'm getting a new job. What can I cover now? That you are no longer forced to cover, or now what can we splurge on because we have the extra money coming in?
Yeah, and I think we did a really good job of practicing the 50-50 is not equitable when we're making different amounts, because when we moved in together, you had just left the military. You didn't have a job for a little bit. So actually, I ended up covering rent for a couple months entirely on my cocktail waitress salary. I used to work at Le Méridien in Roslyn, if anybody knows that hotel. I hate that hotel. I've got a lot of trauma back there, but it paid the bills for a couple months, paid our bills. So shout out Le Méridien. But then you got a job and we started going more 50-50. So it was always fluctuating based on where we were at in our careers.
Since you pointed that out, that's really an important part of it, is that the 50-50 doesn't have to be, set in stone. I think that's what a lot of people think when it comes to relationships. Like I either pay for everything or we're splitting everything. But we job hopped a lot. At one point in time, you were making more money than me. Now you're making more money than me. Yeah. So it kind of, it's a constantly moving scale That's what I mean. So at one point in time, you'll pay everything. At one point in time, I'll pay everything. It's just back and forth.
Yeah.
But it remains equitable.
Right. And where we're at in our relationships, budget, and careers now is I make $150,000 a year as CEO of STS. How much do you make?
I make $100,000 as cameraman and I guess,
Co-founder.
yeah, co-founder. There you go.
Partner in crime.
But I also do have VA disability as another source of income. So the 100 is nice. The VA is even better.
Yeah, and for that reason, since I'm making a little bit more, I put the majority of our income, I see it as like a big pot, but I
Yeah.
put the majority of my paycheck on our mortgage, and then you handle like miscellaneous costs and the utilities. So we split it up based on, the costs are pretty equitable to how much we make in the pot, but it's split out around the plate all over with our
Yeah.
different budget items. And I think that works for us.
Yeah, it works out perfect. But with that, I guess then the biggest question is, because we never really answered it, is like when in a relationship should these things be revealed? We kind of got to understand that pay is kind of one of those ones that you can, get out there right up front. But then like your credit score, because you don't want to be on the verge of marrying this person and realize that they have $200,000 in debt and a 320 credit score, and you're trying to
Yikes.
buy a house.
Yeah. Not a good place to be. Definitely some tough conversations over dinner. I think we should turn it over to the audience and ask you all, what do you think? When would be the right time to have this conversation? When would you want to know how much your partner makes and for what reason?
I would definitely say the length that you guys just stated, it literally fit the same timeline as myself and my girlfriend. Being that I know I'm committed to, this is the person that I plan on marrying, and being that she's committed as well, it made all of the sense to begin to, being that I'm a finance guy, I wanted to immediately get into it, and that was the mistake that he mentioned. The guy right here, he mentioned that I did feel like it was a little bit maybe too early, and I could see like the retort that she gave me and things like that. But after like our relationship developed and things like that, I could start to see her open up, and we finally began to have the conversation. When it comes to like consolidating like bank accounts and things like that, I'm strictly just gonna wait until we actually begin to live together, because right now we're long distance. But I definitely think 5 to 6 months is like a good like measuring stick in terms of where it's at, especially if you know you're going to be committed to this person or not. So once we realize that, just begin to like her credit has jumped up 30 to 40 points since we began to do everything with
Love
my
it.
credit card.
Love that.
We're able to gather points, double the amount of points, because we put our rent, my rent, her car insurance, my car insurance. We put pretty much everything on the credit card, and we just pay it
That's
down
how
at
you
the end
do
of the
it.
month. So I would say 6 months, and it's mostly on the man when it comes to the woman, because men, even though it's like a taboo for men to talk about their salary, that stuff is in the past now. But now it's more about whenever you guys feel like you're ready in terms of that, it's immediately go time, because the faster you get on top of it, the faster you can get to where you guys are at.
Right. Yeah. It's like a cheat code almost. You get a partner to help you reach all your goals, and you have two incomes now that you can use to achieve everything that you have set for yourself. So at least in our case, working together has helped us move way far ahead versus just going it alone, which is annoying because I kind of don't like the precedent that sets. I'm going on sort of a tangent, but it makes me a little bit nervous about, people wanting to be independent for the right reasons and just not being able to afford to be independent if they want to be. So I kind of worry a little bit about what that might do to the youths and the dating scene in the future, but that's a tangent. So the next bit that we're going to talk about is a fun little segment you all may have heard. It's called Am I the A-hole? I'm going to censor my the S's there, but we're going to read a real story from someone on Reddit related to this topic, and then we're going to react to it as a group. Sound good? All right. Am I the a-hole for asking my lower salary boyfriend to pay half the rent? Me, 33-year-old female, and my boyfriend, 32-year-old male, have been together 2 years. When we met, he was living with his parents, and I was new to the area with a 1-bedroom apartment. I work an office job, regular 9 to 6, plus occasional weekends for deadlines. He's a freelance arts teacher, part-time hours, and they can be at a different school every day. His salary's not 100% stable, but on average, I make about 3 times his wage. The rent on my place eats about a third of my salary. He's a sweet, creative guy, and I fell for him from the first date. We're inseparable, and he's been staying at my place 5 nights a week, basically from the day we hooked up. 2 mornings a week, he teaches at schools near his parents' place, and so those days he sleeps back with his folks. Otherwise, he'd have to get up like an hour earlier if he stayed over with me. It sucks because I want to go to sleep next to him every night, but nobody wants to get up at 5 a.m., so I don't feel emotionally abandoned or anything by this. But in these 2 years, he hasn't contributed a cent of rent. He contributes in kind a bit. Basically, he cooks maybe a couple meals a week. I can't cook. We dine out for the rest. He does the washing up, though not very well. And meanwhile, he pays rent to his parents for those 2 nights a week, whereas he's in my apartment 5 nights a week. So the other day, we had that conversation. I said that I want us to live together officially. I want us to be a household, and that means him making reliable contributions. I don't need his money to make rent, but I guess I want his commitment or his investment. I don't know if that makes sense. If we split the rent 50-50, that would be half of his salary going to rent and a sixth of my salary going to rent. So 50-50, not coming across as equitable here. I thought this was entirely reasonable, romantic even. We were finally going to have our home, not just my home. Well, nope. I got a lot of pushback. He said, I'm so poor compared to you. It's not fair that you're asking for 50-50 when you make so much and I make so little. He also said, I'd still have to send money to my parents. They're my parents. I can't just cut their income stream without warning. Then he said, if I have to pay rent, I'll have no savings or security. And he also said, if I do this, you'll pay for us whenever we go out to eat, right? I won't be able to afford to go to restaurants or movies with you otherwise. You'd be lonely if I didn't come over. I'm doing you a favor. I was astonished. I was crying by the end of the conversation. I don't feel like I'm asking for something unreasonable. I'm not asking him to start contributing to my saving to buy a house fund that I hope he'll live with me one day. I'm just asking for an equal split of the month-by-month fundamental price of keeping a roof over both our heads. Am I the a-hole?
So first off, he's a D-bag. Like,
tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, like, come on, bro.
Yeah.
That's terrible. I get where he's coming from because by all means, that's half of his salary. Mm-hmm. But the statements that he made in retaliation to what she said, that's just big red flags. Like, I don't even know if she should be moving forward with this guy.
Yeah. It doesn't seem to me from what she said that they're aligned in terms of where they want to put their finances, because it sounded like she was looking at a house and building for the future, and he's still paying his parents for rent back home. So it's like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. And it's like she said, I think that the finance for her is more of an investment. She wants to know that he's committed. And with a response and a reaction like that, I would argue he's not giving committed.
Yeah, because, I mean, you barely make enough so that you can live your life, let alone also contribute to hers, but she'll be lonely without you.
Right. I didn't like that either.
I don't, yeah.
But I did think if we have to give him a break, I think one thing that he said that resonated with me was when he said, are you going to pay for me when we go out to eat? Like, are you going to cover those things? And in a sense, I feel like that might come from some type of fear that he might have, that maybe in his upbringing, or, and it makes sense. You don't want to be 100% reliable on somebody else, especially at a young age. It's the financial control, right? Sure, you want it to make sense, but you also still want to be able to support yourself on your own 2 feet. And
right.
I think there, especially with masculinity, feeling like everything's going to be covered could be a harm to the ego. And so I think it's a little bit of both, that he doesn't want things to be covered because he wants his independence because of his ego, but then he also wants to make sure that he's not going to be in a situation where he has no more control.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that completely makes sense. I mean, you still want to be able to put money that you have towards the things that you have or want, but at the same time, like, if you're already paying rent to your parents, you understand that there needs to be some type of contribution to make sure that the household flows, accordingly. So I think what he should have did was came back and said, hey, instead of 50-50, maybe I can contribute 30%, or
Here's what I can do.
yeah, but like I think he took it as either this happens or nothing happens, rather than it could be a negotiation. If he took it as a negotiation and said, hey, I can't contribute that. I can do 20%, and this way I can still, pay for dinner every now and again when we go out, then I think that that would have been a better response, showing that you're still willing to make that investment.
But it's not even a negotiation, it's a collaboration, right?
Collaboration,
Like
yeah.
a key difference in how you bring,
You're right,
the
you're right,
energy you
yeah.
bring to that conversation. I think it's a great time to turn to the audience. What are your initial thoughts on this story?
So a couple things to give my man a little grace here. First off, I think you brought up great points, which I think the first thing is you should have this conversation well before you decided to move in, right? So I think if it was ever a situation where it's like, I really want you to move in with me, and then you realize that he can't afford or can't contribute, that's one thing. If they both agreed to have certain terms going into it. So I think it's still responsible for, before you're inviting someone to live in your house, because it is her house.
Yeah.
Like what is it going to look like?
Right.
And kind of to your point is, okay, maybe it's, hey, I'll pay the electrical bills. I'll pay the phone bills. I'll do the cleaning or the cooking for an amount of time, so it saves us money in other areas. That's probably where the conversation needed to happen as well. Because
Correct.
I can't contribute the same as you, because it definitely hurts a lot more for me. But I'm the type of person, I'm going to do everything in the house. If I know I can't contribute to the lifestyle of being in this home and contribute the 50-50, you're not going to see me like lounging around or hanging around. I'm going to do everything I can, because I want to make sure you at least feel as though this is a partnership. But I think that's a part of maybe even the percentages is like, what can you support with? And at the very least, the things around the house should be the priority number one. Things that don't require any monetary exchange. But at the very least, it's like, okay, I'll cover these particular bills. And that's at least one thing off the plate when we think about like the future that we're building. But I'll kind of go back to the first point. We should kind of talk this out before we move in, because now it's an awkward situation where I'm already been here. We've kind of started establishing ourselves. And now it feels like we're kind of changing the rules of like how we kind of approach this at the beginning. So I think it's still definitely like, let's talk about this first. And then going from there, like, this is what I can contribute or what I can at least do to take a little bit off of your plate, so it does feel like it's a compromise in a relationship.
I agree with that. And especially because you mentioned that it's a partnership. With that understanding that it is a partnership, so you're in this together. So, like, yeah, I can do other things around the house because I can't financially contribute. Or I'll take care of certain bills because I know that that's within my budget.
I thought it was really interesting, the mention about supporting his parents, though. I definitely want to talk about that, because I wonder if there's a cultural difference there. Is it in some cultures you're expected to take care of your parents, especially as they get older, and that responsibility grows as they age and as you age. And I just wonder if anyone in the audience has had similar experiences with cultural differences. Yeah, we've got one in the back. How have you navigated that and had those discussions?
Thank you. So in my culture, you're always going to be taking care of your parents. Like, that's a given and you can't get out of it. And it's something that, when I heard that piece, when he said, well, I still have to contribute to my parents, I felt like, there's some hope yet, because every other part, really, I was kind of like a guy is supposed to provide. And that's the way that I grew up, right? So not only, I feel like the conversation should have came from him, like, hey, I'm living in your home 5 days a week. I should probably contribute to the cooking or the buying the takeout or whatever the case may be. So maybe she wouldn't feel like the a-hole or that pressure to ask him to collaborate. But I think that it's a hard thing to do when you're working part-time or you don't have the job of your dreams yet, and you still have that responsibility to take care of your parents. And it's something that you can't change, and you can't tell them, oh, I'm living here 2 days a week because it's your parents. They're going to be like, no, this is your home. And,
Right.
you can be here 5 days, 7 days a week, like whenever you want to be. So it was a choice of him to kind of be away for those extra 5 days. So he needed to figure out, can I really afford to live outside of my home for 5 days before he decided, it was okay to stay there all those other days, even if it was convenient.
Yeah, 100%. I love that. I think it's just so important to have those conversations because you never know how people were raised or what expectations they have back home. In a way, I almost feel for him because you're being pulled in a million different directions and everyone's asking something of you. You have to please everybody. And sometimes there's just no compromise when there's so many, seats at the table or people at the table. And so you have to make a decision. And sometimes that makes you the a-hole.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah, but one thing I did want to bring up that was mentioned in the earlier comment was the question is basically should contributions be proportional to income, and should they always be some type of split? And maybe the way that we should approach it is less of financial transaction and more if you can't bring finances to the table, what else can you bring to the table? And there was a really good point there about domestic chores. I mean, stay-at-home moms, that is not a job that is compensated, and it should be the highest compensated in the world. There's a lot of responsibility there, and that applies as well to, when you're just living at home, just you and I. We have things that have to be done around the house, and you pick up a lot of the brunt of that, and I think that makes our partnership more equal because I put more money in, but you put a lot of effort into the house that's not financially measurable, but still makes an impact.
Yeah, and that was definitely on purpose by all means. Like, if I know that I'm not contributing as much financially, then I figured, hey, the pets need to be taken care of. They need to be walked, things like that. Calls need to be made for the house because we're in the process of getting the house rebuilt. But
Our house is sinking, if you didn't know.
So all
It's a
of
whole
these
thing.
other things, though. So I was like, yeah, I can definitely pick up slack there because it's needed.
Yeah, and so I wonder if his situation where he feels like there's a big responsibility back home to his parents that you can't leave behind, that's family. Maybe there's a conversation that he could have with his family about, I need to contribute financially where I'm living the majority of the month instead of the two days a month or 2 days a week. What can I do to make up for, a loss in their income? How can he help out around their house? As they get older, I'm sure there's a lot of things that
There's
they would
definitely a
also
lot.
appreciate his help with. And so maybe it's not going to look like a financial split, but maybe a more responsible split, and he might have to spend more time over there to take care of them, but without the financial obligation. Everybody's got their own situations, and that's why we talk about it. All right. The other question we had is commitment versus contribution. So the woman feels that sharing rent would signify a deeper commitment. How do financial contributions reflect commitment in a relationship? I think we talked about this earlier about how offering to cover the bill on the first date shows commitment, but how far does it go?
I think it goes a little bit deeper than that. So the rent contribution actually shows a lot of investment into the relationship. Taking part of your finances to actually cover living space, you become invested in that living space, so you're invested into that relationship. So I think it kind of varies based on whatever that contribution is and to what that contribution is supposed to be for.
For sure. Yeah, no, I totally agree. All right. We've got a question right here.
Thank you. So I want to kind of go back to the last one with the scenario. For me, there was something you said that you read where he said you should be lucky. And that turned it off for me because I felt like that parent payment was an excuse. He wasn't committed. He was using it as an opportunity, right? Why pay for the house if you can lay in the house for free?
Right.
And so I'm really big on teaching people how to treat you. And she opened the door for something she didn't want. She allowed him to stay in her house, eat off her food, sleep in her bed, get goodies, and no responsibility. And he could come and go as he pleased. But that's not what she wanted. It's what he wanted. And so then to ask him to pay half, he probably wasn't ready. It wasn't a committed relationship. So they were never, I don't feel like they were ever going to be in a good spot anyway. But to answer your question now about commitment, I feel like it depends. If you're in he said 5 or 6 month relationship, I think that's different than if you're in a relation like marriage.
Right.
Because I'm a little more traditional. I'm probably older than some of you, but I feel like if you're making 100,000 and he's making 100,000, it's a we. It's not
Correct.
your
No,
100,000 and
definitely.
your 100,000.
Yeah.
We're working with 200,000.
Yeah, we
and
make
how are we
200.
gonna pay these bills with this 200,000?
Yep.
And so I feel like if you were in a commitment, then the money, it doesn't matter who's bringing it in. It's a pot. Whether you have the same account or whether you separate your accounts, paying for what you all can afford with what you have is what you got to work on.
Yeah.
I've been with my husband like 39 years, and
Congratulations.
we have
Wow.
thanks. We have. I've made more than him. He's made more than me, but he's always taken care of our rent. You know, so like even if I was making more, he took care of the rent. I have friends who make six figures, high six figures. They're not looking for a man making a whole lot of money. They want other things. So it also depends on where you come in life.
Yeah.
You know, if you're 55, 60 years old, money is not your problem, then you just may want a man that treats you good, cuddles nicely,
Yeah.
and takes you out, smells well,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Just some
Yeah.
basic hygiene.
Basic. You're not looking for a man making a whole lot of money
Yeah.
necessarily, but it depends on where you are in life. So I think the win you asked for initially, I think the win is a good time to talk about that is when two people are coming together to say, we want more of this relationship with each other, whether it's a commitment, whether it's engagement, 2 months and I don't know you, we don't need to talk about how much I make. But if
Right.
I am moving forward, then let's talk about it because those things are going to be very important.
Yeah, when you decide to go forward as a team, that's when you partner up. And like we said, not a negotiation, a collaboration. Yeah, that's so true. Even thinking about the numbers, I was like, our money is a pot. Like we just
Yeah,
put
yeah, it's a
all our
pot.
money into one checking account. And the amount that comes out in terms of how much we make is probably more for me for the rent. But like, I don't even see it that way. I do see it as a pot. And I think that's the best part is we see how we can maximize our earnings, to reach our goals. It's all about mindset and definitely the time and place of, is it the right person? Is it the right time in life? If you've got your own home and you've paid for it yourself and you just want a nice date on the weekends, like it doesn't matter. Right. Great point.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you definitely brought up some good stuff. Especially because, like you said, I think it kind of was her fault. Because she even mentioned in the story that the guy had just started staying there after hooking up. Like it was just kind of a thing that happened. So, I mean, she kind of did open the door for that with the expectations of this becoming a relationship when that may not have been the case for him.
Should have had the conversation way earlier.
Yeah. We got another one.
Yeah.
Would you guys be willing to share what your challenges were when you first got together in terms of discussing, money just individually from like your like childhood experiences or just where you were at that time?
Well, transparently, James has children. So when we got together, that was definitely something that we had to talk about. You were prior married, you were divorced, you were in the military, like
So
they
it's
do in the military. They
standard
just
issue.
get married
Wife
right
and
away
kids.
and pop out some kids. But we're in a really great relationship with them now. So no beef there. But definitely when we started, at least navigating your collections on your credit score was a hurdle. But I think it was always just about how I viewed James that made things easier to talk about. And so I think it does come back to the right person, and the right time in our lives. Everything up to, everything that you did in our relationship was what I expected. I never had any questions of like, is he committed or not? Like every day you showed up and you were committed. So I think that gave me a lot of trust in him to believe you when we would have conversations about finances and trust you. And really, I saw a partner in you more than anything. And so I think it would have been a lot more difficult if there was a lack of trust or if we had those issues. But if you show up every day for your partner and you prove that you can trust them, just with your actions, it makes things a lot easier. So I think we just avoided a lot of problems up front just by being that way with one another.
Yeah. Obviously, I agree with everything that you said. Yeah,
You
we were
better.
just we were just pretty open from the beginning. So when we first started talking about moving in together, we went apartment touring. We had a discussion on how much we would be able to afford for rent. I was in the process of leaving the military, so I didn't have anything lined up. So we already had the discussion that I would take a little bit of time off in between the military and finding a job. We already knew how much she was making from her job. So the conversations were just easy because we both understood that we're in this for the long run, and we're going to make whatever it is work. So during that time frame, we came up with the money for the apartment. We actually got the apartment, moved in together, and then from that moment, it was combined finances at that point. Like, we no longer had our own pot of money. Everything was this partnership and our bills collectively. And I
I
think
think
that,
we still had our own bank accounts, but like we looked at it
yeah,
as a
but we
pot.
looked at it as a pot. And that was obviously just because we don't want to immediately merge accounts when you don't fully know the person. I mean, we moved in pretty quick, but I think we knew where we wanted to go.
Yeah. I will say though, we did have one major fight, which I'll let y'all in our business. This is probably the biggest fight we've ever had. And it definitely was a moment where I was like, uh-oh, is this a rocky patch ahead? Was when you purchased something that you didn't tell me about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can talk a little bit about that. So like purchases and hidden purchases, or just not aligning on purchases. James's Marine Corps, you bought a weapon that is for sport. I'm not a fan. Not a fan.
Was not a fan.
Still
during
not
that
a
time.
fan of that. And I think the reason you didn't tell me was because you knew what the reaction might have been.
No. So
Okay.
the reason I didn't tell her was because growing up, like I said, we were kind of tight for money. But then during the military, I started making friends, and like I would see how they would move throughout their life. So I would kind of adjust my life accordingly as well. And then we had a discussion about weapons prior to us moving in together. I understood that she wasn't a big fan of them, but she did understand that I also, enjoyed owning them. And then one day I was like, oh, I can make this purchase because I have this money to spend. I was still looking at everything as though it's our money, but in that instance, it was, well, I made a little bit of extra money on my paycheck. I can afford this. It's not affecting our bills. It's not affecting whether or not we'll be able to go out or anything like that. So I purchased a weapon. And when I came home, we had the discussion. And it was more so that I made the purchase without having the discussion first. It was about $200-$300, So to me,
It
I
wasn't
didn't think,
hugely expensive.
yeah, I didn't think that it was that big of a deal. But then we also had a discussion about this not too long ago. And that was because to me, a big purchase is defined as roughly $500 or more. Even when I wasn't making a lot of money, $500 was still kind of like the cap. I was like, all right, anything above $500 we need to have a discussion about.
But
So-
I'm the opposite. I think a big purchase is anything like over two.
Yeah. So we didn't have that conversation prior to that, though. And that kind of what led to the argument. It wasn't only just because it was a weapon, but it was also because to her, it was a big purchase. And once we had this discussion, then I realized, okay, so it's more about our communication more than anything. So
Yeah.
I'm still pretty transparent. Obviously, when I came home, I told her, hey, this is what I did, because I was
not
excited.
happy.
I was excited to show her.
Really
I was
not happy.
I was like a kid who just came home. I'm like, let me show you my new shiny thing.
Immediate fight.
Yeah,
It was
immediate
so
fight.
bad.
But yeah, it was more so just the communication before, and I understood after that my biggest issue in the relationship was communication, which for a lot of men that is the case. We
Yeah.
just don't communicate well, and I just had to figure out how to communicate what I was thinking as well as how to communicate it to you so that you can understand what I'm trying to say.
And I guess to add to that, something that has really helped us overcome difficulties with communication has been rooting, literally one-on-one, talking to one another and reminding you this communication is not a confrontation.
Yeah.
It's not a challenge. It's not an attack. It's communication. I want to know why this purchase mattered to you. Why was it important? Why did you want to spend the money? And what are you going to use it for? Like, what does it bring to your life? Asking those questions opens up the door to a more, even conversation, I would say.
Even.
Otherwise, it can feel like an interrogation. And when it feels like that, that's when walls start to close and doors start to close as well. Walls go up and doors close. So I think it's always just been about how we've approached the conversations, just being very open about this is a collaboration. This is not an interrogation. Let's work together and understand each other.
Yeah.
I hope that answered your question. That was pretty long-winded. Do you have any other questions? I feel like now is a really great
Yeah,
time to
actually,
just turn it
yeah,
over
it's
to
it's
any
almost
questions
Q&A
that y'all
time.
have. Yep, we've got about 10 minutes left before we do a little bit mingling. So we're here to answer any questions about finances, navigating it in our relationship, our own relationship, salary transparent street, anything like that. And we got a question right here.
I mean, this is kind of what you guys just talked about as far as, I mean, that takes a high level of maturity, you know, as far as communicating.
Good job, Jay.
I mean, and just in general, that could always be a trigger with purchases, and then also kind of going back to the previous "am I thing in that relationship. Let's say they stayed further down the road. Sometimes you make these decisions without listening or communicating, and it creates resentment.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
And kind of like in relationships, that can, you just don't see it, but
And
it
it
starts, it builds and builds, and without the discussion, and then even on your part, you know, saying, hey, why is this important to you? And not judging and being like, oh, because some people will say that's important. Is that important to you? And then be like, oh, that's stupid.
Right.
And
Right.
it'll shut off, you know, close
Yeah.
the door, but kind of, you know, and part of the communication is you hear that from him and you're like, okay, let me, like you guys do, let me figure out how this works in our relationship, right?
Yeah.
You want to buy guns, I'll go out and find, you know, but that's a good thing, you know,
Yeah.
to keep the communication open. So
Yeah.
it wasn't more so a question. It was just like how you're navigating a lot of the situation where folks may not be that mature, and it's not necessarily reflected in media about how you make these
Yeah.
decisions. You know, people kind of hold their finances to themselves. They want to be flashy, and
Yeah.
until
Yeah.
it, you know, and that could be part of you know, lead to a real problem.
Yeah. And speaking of the maturity, it really points out to me that we need financial literacy courses. We need some type of financial education in our high schools, even in our middle schools. Your young daughters, we have really fun conversations with them. We try to
Yep.
teach them the value of $1 and the value of $1 to them. One of their favorite stores that they love to go to is Five Below because you can get so many things for $50. And so
Yeah.
when they visit, we were actually just there. We tell them, like, we treat them and we tell them, you have $50, you know, go spend it and get things that really value to you or matter to you. And afterwards, just seeing them go through their haul, you know, their little Sephora haul, but it's a Five Below haul, and they're pulling out all the things that really excited them that they got to buy, and seeing the value end up being 50 and what that looks like, I think teaches them a lot about the importance, the value of $1.
Oh, I think it definitely does. I mean, and I've been trying to do that for a while now. You know, like we'd go to the store and I'm like, grab whatever you want that's within $10. They'll come back and I'm like, are you sure that you want that? Because you can put that back and get two things, you know, for the same price and stuff like that.
And
So
then they try to do the
yeah,
deals.
and you can see the
and-
cogs working in their mind. They're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, kids are always open to have those conversations. It's just about the approach. Yeah,
Sorry,
go
it's a
ahead.
question.
No,
As
go
a
ahead. We've
teacher,
got
so
the
as
time.
a teacher, so for instance, I'm thinking in my
cool.
teacher mind, how beneficial would this conversation now be to a group of high school students, a mixed group, both men and
Yes.
boys and girls,
Imagine.
Yes.
to see a couple
Hey,
have this
Capital One.
discussion,
Just kidding.
right? You know, like I'm just thinking about how that would like elevate and they would take away from what they take away from it, but they couldn't say they've never seen that, you know, or
Yeah,
had
correct.
that discussion. So-
Right.
Yeah, because a lot
Exactly.
of the stuff in our relationship was my first time experiencing. You know, I've never walked through my credit before, honestly, prior to us getting together.
You didn't even know
Yeah,
the
I
three
didn't know
credit
how,
bureaus.
Yeah, I didn't know how to pull them. I understand, like you learn very wave tops of these things in school. You know, like these are the 3 financial institutions, and this is what your credit score should be. But nobody walked me through. This is how to tackle your credit score. This is what happens. You know, if you have a delinquency on your credit, how do you tackle that? Nobody walked me through that. So we figured that out on our own.
Yep.
And these are things that, you know, now I have in my toolbox that I can, you know, teach other people.
Speaking about kids, I just thought of something random, but the other day I actually had a conversation with them about how flashy cars doesn't always mean
Yeah.
rich people, and telling them, you know, about the value of $1 versus the loan, and, you know, affording the loan. And, you know, if a guy in a really nice car comes and picks you up, because he's got daughters, so we were trying to prep for that. They're getting there. You know, that doesn't mean shit. You know, you don't know what they're paying or what the loan is, and
Right.
can they afford the car, so it's cool to have those conversations, and I think it's so important, especially with kids, no matter their age.
Yeah, I think the youth really does benefit from hearing stuff like this.
It's exciting. It's really fun because I think there's so much that we can share with them from what we do. Like, I love just having conversations with them about what do you want to do? Like, what excites you? And your middle daughter is really big on care and
Yeah, nursing.
hospitality, and she wants to be a nurse, and I believe her. She's been saying she's wanted to be a nurse since she was like 6. And it's so cool that she still wants to do that to this day. I don't know many people who still want to do the same thing from 6 to 10.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's really cool to have those conversations and share what we know, like negotiate and do the market research, because nobody taught me that.
All right.
We've got a couple more minutes. Any last minute questions? We've also, if you don't want to be on camera or get the mic, we can answer questions one-on-one after we wrap.
So, question for you all: how do you like approach your money conversations? Is it like a monthly check-in or quarterly check-in? 'Cause I know you said your high purchase was 500, yours was 2. Was it like a middle ground at all, or like how do y'all approach that?
So the way that we originally started approaching that conversation was actually just due to us job hopping. So every time when we job hop, we'd have the discussion of like, yeah, like how much now are your paychecks bringing in? And then from there, we'll have a quick little discussion of like, okay, cool, that adds this much to your budget. Like, what do you plan on doing with that? Because as long as our primary bills are taken care of, then anything outside of that, we consider this extra. We still try to limit things like going out to eat, even with the extra money. And then like at that point in time, we did actually stop going out, which going out took most of our money every weekend. That was like $1,000 just drinking. DC's
Not 1,000.
It was a lot. DC's a terrible
Maybe
place
today.
to drink. But yeah, so it was a periodic check-in whenever we would get a new job. Now I think more so we have this conversation still regularly. It's just not as often because now we've been doing this for 3 years now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think finances are just always top of mind, at least for me. I love money, and when I say that, I mean I love how it works. I love the power of it. I think it's fascinating. And so even before I found out that I was underpaid, I remember like being at my 9 to 5 at Booz Allen. Don't tell them. Well, I quit a long time ago, so it's fine. But I remember being at work when I didn't have anything to do, twiddling my thumbs and building out a budget and being like, if we made this much, this is how much
Yep.
we could afford. And so it was just kind of like setting those goals for myself of like, I want to make this much money because then I can afford like this house. And I've just love to plan ahead. And so I think it's just always been top of mind for me that we almost talk about money in our budget. Definitely weekly.
Yeah,
I don't want to say
definitely
daily,
weekly.
but sometimes, it's fun to talk about money, I think. A lot of people are very intimidated and fearful of it, and that totally makes sense. Our relationships with money are so fraught and very they can flux a lot. And so, and money is dangerous. It can completely change your life if you do wrong with it. And so I just think it's fascinating what it can do. And the way that I perceive it is opportunity and just the things that you can have in your life if you set those goals for yourself. So I think the money conversation motivates me.
Yeah.
So we have it pretty frequently.
Yeah, and one way that she also brings it up is via Zillow. So she'll be like, "Oh, I just found this house on Zillow, and it's only, this much.
$3 million.
We can definitely afford that if we made this much, So
We're not there yet.
yeah,
Not in this economy.
and I do the same thing, but with motorcycles. So I go, "Hey, I just found this motorcycle. I can afford this."
Yeah, that was a good question. Thank you so much. Hopefully that answered it. Any other questions before we wrap?
I'm curious to know at your age and your generation, if you're having the conversation about end of life, right? Like, what if you get sick and you lose your income, health insurance? Those are real things. Life is beautifully unpredictable, as I like to say. So, is that a conversation that you've had yet?
Yeah. Actually, I didn't have a will for a
You
really
still
long
don't
time.
have
I
a
still
will.
don't have a will. I have it drafted, but I don't have it signed or anything. So technically, I don't have one yet because they're not going to look in my notes app and be like,
Right.
"This is Bible."
Okay, we got to make sure that.
I didn't sign it or anything. So yeah, so I still don't have a will, but we've talked about it because you were in the military. So
Yeah.
it was really important for you to have a will because of the benefits that would go to your daughters and just making sure that you tied up those loose ends. We haven't had as many serious conversations as I think we should because like you said, things can change on the flip of a dime. Like, it's unpredictable. And we haven't had the tough conversations about, the costs of end of life, and also parents and those financial responsibilities with family too.
Yeah, we haven't had it like full sit down, but we have had like passing conversations about it. So she knows that I have a will. She knows like where to find my will at, right? Yeah. So
Answer later.
But she knows that I have a will. And with that, like, I make sure that I periodically update my will accordingly, because it's something that you want to keep in mind. And then we kind of have had the conversations of like, hey, if we no longer had this money today, like, what would we be doing?
Yeah,
or
we've
like,
had
what
those
do we do?
conversations.
So like, we make sure that we have a savings account with all of enough money to be able to take care of us for however long. And then we constantly contribute to it and stuff like that. So I wouldn't say we've had the conversation directly, but we've had bits and pieces of it.
Yeah, it was a big focus of us to build up our emergency savings, because for several years when we got together, we didn't have emergency savings. And that was one of those things whenever we would hear people say, like, you need to build up your emergency savings. I'm like, how? With what money? And so once we started making, and honestly, the only time we started building it up was when we started Salary Transparency, because we
Well,
were
that was
making.
when we used it as well. So
Right.
when
We
first-
depleted the small amount we had, and then
Yeah.
we built it back up. And I can tell you, having that 6 months of emergency savings is just a type of peace that I've never felt before financially. So I would advise it to anybody to build up that nest, because you never know when you'll need it. But that is all we've got for y'all today. Thank you so much for listening. This was so fun. Give yourselves a round of applause.
Give yourselves a round of applause.
And if you're listening to the pod on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or YouTube, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.